Hey, welcome to our coffee house. Here in Ezekiel is where we're at. We're in Ezekiel chapter 3, starting with the 10th verse. If this is the only message that you're catching in Ezekiel, let me tell you a little bit about Ezekiel's life. He grew up wanting to be a priest. Actually started studying for the priesthood, but in the Jewish tradition, you cannot be a priest till you're 30 years of age. When you read chapter 1 of Ezekiel, you'll find out that God calls him when he's 30 years of age to be a prophet. Now that's a little different category than a priest. One is very beloved by the people, the priest, as they walk down the street and they get blessed by the people and everything. The prophet, people run from. Okay? And so that's kind of a whole strange thing that took place in the middle of the Babylonian captivity. Ezekiel is now in Babylon, and he's trying to deal with the best that he can with. He's no longer able to go to the temple, which is in Jerusalem still. It hasn't yet been destroyed. And he has this calling on his life, and he learned some things. In your notes, I want you to see that Ezekiel's job, it's a tough job. Some of you go, I have a job like that. I work with people like that, or I deal with people like that. If you notice, I put all the things so you don't even have to write down this first portion here today as the review. But to share the truth with stubborn people, sometimes that might be family members. For Ezekiel, it was to the Jewish people. He wasn't called to share the truth with the Babylonians. He was called to share the truth with the Jews. And the Babylonians probably would have listened. The Jews weren't listening. The Jews had this whole process of that they have been taught lies by false prophets, and that was number 2 underneath here, that they had to preach to people who were trained to hear lies as truth. Does that sound like the 21st century to you? People that are trained to hear lies as truth. That's why we call it fake news all the time anymore, because they're sharing these lies as if it's gospel truth. The third aspect of his job is to give the message of judgment. Now, as a pastor, I'm supposed to give the message of good news. That's my main calling as a pastor. As a prophet, because remember, my calling is pastor/prophet, the prophets are called to give judgment. That's why they weren't properly loved people. That's why they were isolated a lot. People don't want to hang with somebody that their job is to bring notice to God's judgment that's coming. It's kind of like, we like to hang with the good news people. Those that are going to bring the bad news, let someone else, we'll choose to tune out of that. All right. So, the fourth area is we started saying, don't miss so early here in Ezekiel. There's so many parallels between Israel and the United States. The examples here of what's taken place here, gender is only in the mind. It's not biological today, right? It's not how you're born. So that is really being trained to hear lies as truth, isn't it? That's one of those things there. And America will always prosper. America will always be great. It'll go back to being great. And people believe that. And the reality is America's been crumbling. It's crumbling in its judiciary, it's crumbling in its executive, it's crumbling in its legislative area, it's crumbling in its faith, it's crumbling in its churches and their faith and belief. America is in a decline in so many different areas. Are we still one of the best nations in the world to live in? Absolutely. But if you think that we're a prosperous people, in comparison to what we were before, we have slipped a lot. Moshe would think that I was reading out of a sci-fi book if we went back 35 years, and I'd say to you, in the 21st century, same-sex marriage will be the norm. And kids will get to choose what gender they are. And to tell them different, you will be the person that's looked at as the homophobe or the nutso person that you treat children bad. As a matter of fact, on today's show, I saw a clip of it on the internet. On the Today Show, they brought in an 11-year-old kid dressed in drag. Was it you, Bev, that shared it? No, someone shared it on there that I looked at it, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're condoning an 11-year-old dressed as a woman who's a boy. And his goal was he wanted to be one of the youngest ones to be identified to being very good at being a woman, and yet he was born biologically a man. Crazy. If I would have told you that 35 years ago, you'd go, Pastor, it probably won't happen in our lifetime. Come on now. Well, remember, once you go down the slope, as you're heading, going up is harder. Once you hit the top and you're sliding down, it picks up speed. Here's my thoughts for 2019. If this is Ezekiel's job, I believe my job as we take and look through Ezekiel here in this year, as we go through this, that the increase of the slide will happen tremendously here in 2019. It's going to happen also in the book of Ezekiel. We're going to see that the slide becomes greater and greater. They truly believed, the Jews, were God's people. The temple's still there in Jerusalem. He's going to rescue us. He always does. Look at our history. He rescued us from Egypt. He rescues us from these other things. He's our deliverer, and he's going to take care of them. They don't realize they're where they're at because God's put it in place. He put them in captivity because of their disobedience to the Shemitah. And that's a whole other story in itself. All right. So we pick up today in Ezekiel. I so want to be, when I look down, just going so fast before my mind actually looks at it and goes, Ezekiel chapter 3. Let's look at verses 10 through 12. Listen what it says. And he said to me, Son of man. Now, that phrase, many times you think of Jesus in the New Testament. This is the literal meaning here. Son of man means son of dust. Okay? So that's what it means, even though that term is used there. It's not talking about Jesus. Son of man, listen carefully and take heart to all the words I speak to you. Now, if you remember, we ended 2 weeks ago, before we took our Christmas break, on this note right here. Do what? Listen, take heart to all the words I speak to you. Go now to your people in exile and speak to them. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, whether they listen or fail to listen. Now, think about this for a moment before I do verse 12 here. Come on, God, if you know they're not going to listen, why do I have to go? Isn't that like, God, you already know, you're telling me they're not going to listen, but I have to go and speak it anyway? Why is that so? Because on Judgment Day, God will prove that he's just, that they did hear the truth, and they were stubborn, stiff-necked people that wouldn't obey the truth. So he sends a prophet to be obedient and say, they're not going to listen, I already know that, but it's your job to still go tell them, all right? Now look at verse 12. Then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard behind me a loud rumbling sound, and the glory of the Lord rose from the place where it was standing. That loud rumbling sound is going to become very, very important. But what I want to do is revisit just for a few seconds, because this speaking the word that is planted in your heart is Jesus' concept when he teaches the parable of the sower. He teaches it, and Matthew records it, Mark records it, and Luke records it. If you notice, it builds on on a aspect more than just hearing. In Matthew, it says they hear the word, and when it says it's planted in your heart, Jesus actually tells you what the Holy Spirit was saying through Ezekiel back there. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the parable of the sower says, the heart is that which is the soil. Is your heart good soil? Is it rocky soil? Is it hard soil? And so he's saying, if it's planted in your heart, you hear it and you first understand it. That's Matthew. Mark says you hear it and you then accept it. And remember, you can understand something and go, I understand it, but I'm not accepting it. I understand what you're telling me, but I'm not accepting it. You told me it, but I'm not accepting it. Okay? So there's a greater step than just understanding, it's accepting, and that's what Mark puts in. This is why the synoptic gospels, the three, and this is Jesus' teaching that connects so much with Ezekiel and what his job is here. And then Luke says, not only do you have to hear it with your good heart, that's good soil, and retain it, by persevering, you'll produce a crop. So here's the way now, how many got to eat dinner tonight? Okay, some of you haven't yet either. I haven't eaten dinner yet. I usually eat after Wednesday night. So when you're eating, okay, you've accepted the food, right? What Luke is going on, you need to retain it. You don't want to be chewing on it and go, where do I spit this out at, right? So accepting the food in your mouth doesn't mean you're going to get the nutrients from it and digest it. He's saying you must retain it. So you're going to take it in and you're going to let the word now nourish you. Isn't that good? I knew that would be gross for some in that, but the gross things usually stick in people's minds. Isn't that true? All right. So now we pick it up in verses 13 through 17. And what I want you to look for, as you're seeing in your notes, there's patterns now. Ezekiel is filled with Hebrew patterns. And I'm going to share with you 3 patterns that are really obvious and just things for you to research and look at. We're not going to spend a lot of time in it, but I want you to start seeing the Bible is filled. It's an integrated message system that's divine because the Holy Spirit's involved. The Holy Spirit's the key writer. So verse 13, here we go. Remember, we just heard, by the way, I want to bring this out because when you hear a phrase repeated over and over, we just heard in verse 12, there was this loud rumbling sound as the glory of the Lord. In some translations, they'll actually give it in this way. It was like a mighty rushing sound. See, I'm pointing you to the future where we're going here in this. All right, just setting you up here. All right, verse 13 through 17. It was a sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing against each other, and the sound of the wheels besides them, a loud rumbling sound. The Spirit then lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness and in the anger of my spirit, with the strong hand of the Lord on me. I came to the exiles who lived at Tel Aviv. Now, this is not Tel Aviv of today. This is Babylon, an area in Babylon called Tel Aviv. It's not the Tel Aviv of Israel. Okay, I just thought I'd point that out real quick. Near the Kabar River. And there, where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, deeply distressed. If you notice, I got the 7 days deeply distressed in yellow for you up there. And it's going to pick up this 7-day aspect again. At the end of the 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. All right. So, couple patterns right here. The first I gave you, it was real easy. The mighty rushing wind, that's your one that you're going to fill in there. And that's, yes, exactly the same phrase what's written if you go into the Hebrew of this in Ezekiel and you go into the Greek in Acts chapter 2 verse 2, you see that they're talking about the same thing. What was the mighty rushing wind? What was happening that day? Pentecost. The Spirit was coming. This is showing you that, again, Ezekiel, since chapter 1, has been having a vision of heaven like John had when he got drawn up into heaven in the book of Revelation. He's getting all these weird visions, and he's hearing this mighty rushing wind. This rumbling is what they used it. Now, he uses also this phrase, which is a pattern, the strong hand of the Lord. Now, if you wanted to do an exhaustive pattern search or a cross-reference search on the strong hand of the Lord, It's found in many, many different ways. But the strong hand of the Lord basically is God is taking me somewhere. Remember, he uses these words, I'm not doing so well. I'm at a bitter place. Why? He's not going to be the priest that he dreamed of being. God's calling him to be a prophet, and he's calling him to be a prophet to a stiff-necked people that aren't going to listen. And some very interesting things are going to happen to this man, and oh my, I don't want to give away some of the story out there, but this is probably one of the more unique prophets in how he has to communicate his message. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you this, I believe he probably invented the game charades. Does anybody know the story of Ezekiel and why I'm saying that yet? Okay. He's going to be really mute where he can't speak. A prophet that can't speak. But he's still commanded by God to get the message out. He is going to act out a lot of these messages. So who invented charades? Trivia question. Don't believe what you read in Google who invented charades. Ezekiel the prophet did it. That's my story. All right. Just giving you that ahead. So the strong hand of the Lord, I love this. As a matter of fact, let me just read Psalm 19 to you. It's not going to be up on the screen, but it's worth seeing what the psalmist has to say to us here. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim his works of his hand. Okay? How strong of a hand does it take to mold and shape stars? I sometimes wonder if God's like sitting in heaven going, okay, well, that star is going to go there, that star is going to go there. Like he's finger painting. Boom, 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 boom. How strong is his hands? When he points and he places, they're there. The strong hand of the Lord. So this is the real strong, best connection for what Ezekiel. The strong hand of the Lord took me to where I'm supposed to be because I'm in distress and I'm not going there on my own. If he's going to leave it up to me, I'm going to pout at home and be a little miserable. But the strong hand of the Lord takes me there. Okay? And it computes to as if he took and placed the stars in the places that they are. That's the picture I wanted you to get from that, the pattern there. It's really a beautiful one. All right, and then the last phrase here, he gives us the 7 days several times. 7 days of distress really connects with Jesus' words about those days of distress, and he's talking about his second coming. In Luke chapter 21, verse 23, he's actually talking who's in distress in these last days. It's the women who are pregnant that he could come, and the women would be in distress because they're with child. And so this is it's almost, I wanted you to feel the mother's distress and everything else. This is what Ezekiel is going through, and he uses this phrase, and that 7 days, which when we get to Daniel and he talks about these days, and 7 days is really 7 years. Remember, days are years in Daniel. That this is a literal 7 days for him, but when he puts the word distress in there, it puts a signal of, I'm pointing that there are other distressful times out there, and the one that connects with it the most in this phrase of it is Jesus talking about those last 7 years or days that Daniel would call, and the distress of a woman. So some very interesting patterns in that, all right? How's everybody tracking with me so far? Good. Let's go on then back to Ezekiel, and we're going to go through verses 18 through 21. 18 through 21 is probably the most vital thing that I want you to get tonight. In this day and time, many go, I don't know what I'm responsible for. There's people that want to believe this, they want to believe that, they tell you that, and Ezekiel is for our day today, because just like Ezekiel was told to God to go speak to a people that won't listen, that's the day we're in today. And he's going to spell out what happens if you and I don't do what Ezekiel does in being held accountable. So watch the accountability aspect in these verses 18 through 21, because it speaks to you and I. It's not just for the pastor or for the prophet. It's for every believer, all right? So verses 18 through 21. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to dissuade them from their evil ways in order to save their life, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. Okay, we're not done yet. But if you do warn the wicked person, and they do not turn from their wickedness or their evil ways, they will die for their sin, but you will have saved yourself. So this first one, it's actually dealing with 4 situations. The first 2 deal with the wicked, not warning them and warning them. The next 2 deal with the righteous, not warning them and warning them. All right, so verse 20. Again, when a righteous person turns from their righteousness and does evil, and I put a stumbling block before them, they will die. Since you did not warn them, they will die for their sin. The righteous things the person did will not be remembered, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. Verse 21. But if you do warn the righteous person not to sin, and they do not sin, they will surely live because they took warning, and you will have saved yourself. Now, there's a thing that's here that Jesus uses a lot of times when he's teaching in the New Testament. They say things with knowing that the rest understand this. And so there's some things implied here that I'm going to give you in your notes that you're going to see how it's implied, and I'll bring it to you. The first thing is we're all being held accountable. Number 1, if you don't warn people of evil ways, you're going to be held accountable. I'm going to be held accountable. If what? So if you don't warn people of, we're talking about evil people, wicked people, not Christians, evil, wicked people. If you don't warn them other ways. Now, so when people say, but you're not allowed to tell them that if they're doing these sins and this practice, they're going to hell. Okay, so who are we supposed to warn? Those that God, if you look through the story, it's implied all the way, God tells them, you must go warn them. So when he lays somebody on your heart, you probably shouldn't walk up to a stranger and say, I see what you're doing, and that's wickedness, and you're going to hell. That's probably not the warning God wanted them to get. Usually it works this way. It's a family member, it's a neighbor, it's a acquaintance, or someone that you spend time with in some other ways, and you see them growing in their sinfulness in wicked ways. They're believing a lot of things. Let me tell you, there's a lot of generational people that grew up as Christians that are buying into generational sins that are out there. They need to be warned. If you don't warn people of evil ways, you and I will be held accountable. Now, number 2, here's what's also implied there. We are only to warn and leave the results to God. So we don't have to convince them of their wrong. We're only the warners, not the changers. God's the transformer. He changes. Our job is to say, hey, what I see is going on in your life is not good. There could be severe consequences. Have you thought about that? Now, that's really a very stern warning. But if you notice, it's said in a very proper way. I see changes in your life. I see the direction you go. There could be some very severe consequences going in that. If you need to talk, come, let's talk. That's a warning. Okay? You don't have to tackle the person, hold them down saying, God told me to warn you. So there's a process here that's very, very smart. All right? The third thing is, if you do warn and they don't turn from evil, you are not accountable. If you do warn, but they don't change, again, you don't have to hold their feet to the fire. You're the warner. You're not the changer. If they don't change, they're held accountable. You're not. All right? Fourth thing, we are held accountable to warn righteous people when they stumble. There's a lot of times righteous people start believing, and oh my gosh, I have so many peers right now that I ask God to give me the tenderness how to, as a matter of fact, I was sharing with Carol earlier this morning and Mindy earlier even this morning that God let me watch a film this weekend. It's a true story called Lion, and it's about a 5-year-old kid in India that he goes with his brother on a train, and his brother doesn't come back, and he gets on another train as a 5-year-old trying to figure out life to stay warm, and he ends up 1,200 miles from home, and people are trying to snatch this young little boy and bring him into human trafficking and or sex trafficking, all the many different things, and he ends up in this little orphanage, and a missionary rescues him, and a couple adopt him in Australia. But 25 years later, he's still worried about his brother that was like 10 years older than him, coming back to that platform looking for him and not being able to find him and not knowing what happened to his life, his mom not knowing what happened to his life, his sister not knowing. And he was tormented, but he couldn't remember because he was in such a small village and he rode that train for so long. They went through this long process. He finds his home. He finds his biological mom. He finds out the night that his brother left him on that and said, sleep here while I go do this and I'll come back and get you. One of the trains hit his brother and he was killed that night. But his mom is still alive and his sister's still alive. At the end of the movie it says every year 80,000 children in India are out on the streets in this kind of dilemma. That's not talking about Pakistan. That's not talking about all the millions of kids in China or the other parts of the Southeast Asia or Africa or South America or Mexico or Honduras or Guatemala. Just in India. All of a sudden, I felt so overwhelmed. God, you need to come back. I can't handle the pressure. I told Mindy, I said, how many kids can we adopt to make a dent in this? And then you realize you can't really do it that way, huh? The sins of the world have consequences, and our children are paying the part of that. Now, what God said to me, out of that whole message, you know what God said to me? Look at those that are righteous and sinning, that they don't call me God anymore. They say in open theism, God's not strong enough, or otherwise these things wouldn't go on. Do you feel the anguish you feel in your heart right now for all these kids and there's nothing you can do? That's why they can't live with themselves. They're calling that God must be limited in his power. For the first time, I had a real heart for people that teach open theism. I only wanted to see them as apostate, stupid Christian professors and teachers and pastors that are dumbing down. I realized I saw it from their heart. And I feel as if what God's saying to me is, how do I warn my brothers and sisters? I know these things, there's not answers. And again, here's the problem. We're equating what should be right in a finite situation, and God's going to make it right in eternity. Now, I know that doesn't take away what you fall in love with this 5-year-old kid and amazing. It doesn't take away what they're dealing with right now. But what it does is, again, what I'm showing you is, you go, how do I warn my righteous brother or sister? You have to somehow get in their moccasins, their shoes, and their heart. And to my peers and professors that have taught open theism, I know from my heart it's wrong, but I do know from your heart why you've been going there. Do you see the difference? And I want to warn you, it's dangerous to go there, because you're bringing down their only real hope. You limit God, you've limited the real hope in life. If God could reach this one little boy named Sharu. His name is actually translated as lion. That's why the movie's called Lion. It's on Netflix. It's worth watching. If you take a lot of tissues, I cried a lot at the end. But it will show you the heart of why some people try to change how God's supposed to operate because they can't handle how sinful our world has become. Does that help you? Does that let you see we are to hold accountable to warn, we're held accountable to warn the righteous people when they stumble. Number 5, warning a righteous person according to this passage is effective. He doesn't say, he doesn't use what he uses with the wicked. If they don't hear you, it's on them. If you read that last part of it, it's really powerful here. Verse 21, but if you do warn the righteous person not to sin, and they do not sin, they will surely live because they took the warning, and you will have saved yourself. They don't give the scenario that the righteous person won't take the warning. See, a righteous person responds to real truth. But they also have been getting what Ezekiel people that he's got to speak to, they've been getting lies as truth. They've been fed, these are lies, but we're telling you they're true. And therefore, their hearts are confused. But when the real truth cuts through the lies, I believe it rings to the heart. And so, a lot of different things there. I don't know if I've even communicated well, but I really believe if we speak the truth, when we show that we understand their heart, they're not evil people. They want to rescue and change the world so bad that they'll change who God is to try to help people deal with the suffering that's out there. It's a bad plan. It's not a good plan. But I understand their heart. And so I warn them. Let God be God, even when we can't. I know many of my friends grew up with this. When you can't trace God's hand in what he's doing, you can trust his heart. He's going to make it right somewhere. When you can't trace his hand, you can trust his heart. All right. Verses 22 and 23 moves us to this one little segment that I almost gave up 2 or 3 times because it's about the glory of God, and I know we've talked about it, but I couldn't get away from how this is because I realized chapter 1, what was Ezekiel doing? He was seeing the glory of God in heaven. Chapter 2, he's seeing more of it. In chapter 3 now, he's hearing from God about how to live that brings glory to him. And this is what verses 22 and 23 say. The hand of the Lord was on me there, and he said to me, get up and go out to the plain, and there I will speak to you. So I got up and I went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory I had seen by the Kabar River, and I fell face down. Remember, he was distraught. He didn't want to go. God's hand took him there, and he's distraught about how life is. Israel's in captivity. They're not listening, and his job is to still speak to them and everything. And he's kind of like, God, can I just go back to the temple and be a priest? And, you can hear this in his heart. And God says, go out and stand out there. And when he walks out in obedience, he gets to see the glory of God in a whole new way. The 3 things that I see about the glory of God in this passage here that I believe is different is the glory has impact on all 5 senses. And I'm taking that from the entirety of what we've learned in Ezekiel. It takes the impact on what he sees. You could remember it's what he feels, it's what he hears, the rumblings, all the different things. All 5 senses are enacted when he's in the glory of God. So it's a total transformation of the being implayed in that, and I think that's really powerful. And I take you now to Psalm 91:1. The heavens declare the glory of God. Now, I use Psalms the opposite one. It's almost like change it over where, remember we were at Psalms 19:1, that it was his handiwork that put him in place. The heavens declare his glory. And the reason why I picked that there as part of the glory here in this is that you and I, when we look up to heavens, it's so beyond our understanding. Oh yeah, you might, if you know astronomy, you might be able to pick out the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper and the Northern Star, and you might be able to tell that up there, usually one of the brightest stars up there is Venus, and you might be able to see it, and you can actually have an app now and see these different things. But the reality is, that's just this portion of all that he created out there. And so it's something so beyond definition of humanity's mind thinking. That's why I wanted to say the glory of God is the heavens declare it. You and I really don't have the words to declare what it's like. It enacts all our senses. It's something beyond our words. And then number 3, though, glory exalts his honor and dignity. So there's something in this aspect, and it's shown that Ezekiel would walk out there, that it's showing that he's giving God honor and dignity, that he obeys him because he's God, even though he doesn't feel like it. And because of that, God reveals himself when he gave him honor and dignity. So the glory exalts who he is, gives him honor and gives him dignity. And I thought that was powerful enough to just take a few moments and teach on that. All right. We only have verses 24 through 27. We're going to stop at 26 and save 27 for the very end here. All right. Verse 24. Then the Spirit came into me. Second time we've heard that in these 3 chapters. And raised me to my feet. He spoke to me and said, "Go shut yourself inside your house. And you, son of man, they will tie with ropes. You will be bound so that you cannot go out among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth, so you will be silent and unable to rebuke them, for they are a rebellious people." All right. Remember, I gave you a little preview. God's going to actually cause him to be dumb, and the people are going to come upon him, and he has no response at this point. It's later where you actually see where he will do the charades for him. At this point, this is like, whoa, okay, God, you're going to do what? They're going to bind me, and you're going to, and I can't say anything? There's a powerful parallel here, and I'm still unfolding it because I believe it gets unfolded as Ezekiel acts out some of his message as parables without words. That's the best way to describe what he's going to do here in the future. He's going to act out his message to the people as a parable without words. All right? But in this, I see this Ezekiel-Paul parallel. Both had a season of silence. When Paul was blinded, he was left alone till God sent. Nobody wanted to go, remember? Who wants to go to the guy that's been murdering the Christians? And God says, go. He's silent, blinded in that time period. Both saw a supernatural vision. Paul saw Jesus on the road to Damascus. And before Barnabas gets there and is going to talk to him, he's in silence. So both have a supernatural vision, both have silence, and both were sent to a specific people. Ezekiel is sent to the house of Israel. Paul to the Gentiles. Now, that phrase in itself comes up so much times. Ezekiel to who? The house of Israel. We're in the captivity. They're taking these people out of Jerusalem. We're at this point at about 593, 92 BC. What we would call Israel, the northern kingdom, has been destroyed since 721. Why is God calling him to the house of Israel? They're destroyed. 2 things you need to know. One, when you talk about the house of Israel, it can be all-inclusive of both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. But some scholars, I love that they went down this, that they said, remember, when the Assyrians went in and they took captive the northern kingdom, they were a lot like the Babylonians. They assimilated people into who they were. So when the Assyrians get taken over by the Babylonians, are there northern kingdom people in Babylonia or Babylonian area already? Some suggest that he's speaking to really literally all 10 tribes, though you can't definitively say that, but because he over and over again from throughout his book of Ezekiel, God calls him to speak to the house of Israel. So it's not just to Judah, the southern kingdom, but to all of Israel why he's there in captivity, which is a mystery to many of the scholars to this day. And some think that that will be revealed in the millennium, that some of these things that we don't know, that Jesus, when he's teaching us, he's going to say, here's what you don't see. When you think something is no more, remember, 1,837 years, there was no Israel from 70 AD. Almost 2 millenniums, no nation of Israel, no more. When you think something's no more, God shows it can come back. In 1948, Israel's back as a nation. They've been doing DNA testing, and they've been finding through the DNA testing all 12 tribes. Say, what? Again, only in the 21st century is this kind of technology there available. So, very interesting that the commentaries that you read from the most part, hadn't even taken in DNA testing and all the rest of stuff, but they speculated that God was saying, all of Israel's here in captivity somewhere. And so the house of Israel is a very important part of it. All right. The last verse, I saved it for this, and I'm going to get it done in 1 minute here. But when I speak to you, I will open my mouth, and you shall say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, whoever will listen, let them listen, and whoever refuse, let them refuse, for they are a rebellious people. In the King James, it actually says, let he that heareth, let him hear. Now that is Jesus' connection in the New Testament. Number 2, 7 times in the gospel, this phrase is there. Those that have an ear, let them hear. Most people have an ear, don't they? All right. How many times? 7 times. And then Jesus uses that same phrase that Ezekiel is using here, and it's already been 4 or 5 times that it's been used. Those that listen, let them listen. Those that don't. 7 times in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 to the churches of Revelation, he uses the same phrase. Those that have an ear, let them hear. Okay? So when you see the 7s popping up, and especially in the gospel, it's Jesus' phrase in the gospel, then Jesus' phrase to the churches in Revelation, it's used 7 times to this. Those that have an ear, let them hear. The question is, in an ancient book that now is 2,500 years plus old, what did you hear from God tonight? You have ears. A book that is very relevant for our day. Let our people hear.